You're listening to the Zen Cop Podcast.
Guys, welcome back. Mac Rollins, Zen Cop here. This is the Zen Cop Podcast, Season 2, Episode 9. It's just me today. I wanted to hop on and just talk a little bit about what's going on right now. And I should say what's going on or what has been going on for many, many years. None of this is new. And there's different generations that will go through their own, individual experiences when it comes to seeing other cops killed. That's one of the things that I don't think we really think about until it happens. We know it's there, right? We all know that it happens, but there's just some that tend to make a larger impact, or they gain more notoriety than others. More recently, the New York City police officer who was killed, that gained more traction, I think, because of the scenario, the circumstance, and the fact that we have a lot of moving parts right now when it comes to politics. And it's sad to say it like that, but it's true. Politics in general plays a major role in how certain things get looked at, how they are advertised, how they are perpetuated, so on and so forth. And a lot of people don't really like to get into politics when it comes to stuff like that. And neither do I, frankly. But the sad part is, and I guess the frustrating part, is that politics plays a major, major role in how we move forward, and more importantly, how we prevent this from ever happening again. Can we prevent all of them? The answer is no. Can we reduce that number by a large margin? Well, yeah. And in doing so, there needs to be some major changes to law overall and some of the procedural stuff that goes on within certain cities, counties, and states. Now, one of the things that I do find comical, to be honest, was when we do look at the political side of it, right? And we look at who's in charge, who's running the country, and how they have to feel, act, or speak. I did find it very odd that President Biden chose to address gun control as the reason for this cop's murder. And I'm not surprised, and I wasn't surprised when I heard that, but I genuinely cannot begin to fathom how far we have gone down this hole, or this abyss of just denial when it comes to crime and criminals. And more so, I don't understand how, as a society, we cannot collectively agree that public safety is a very, very important thing, if not one of the most important things we have to keep in control. And as the years go by, I've watched lots of just really bad moves just because political allegiance says they have to. And granted, both sides have their issues. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, one's better than the other, but I will say that one does offer a lot more stability. And overall, I just feel safer with one side versus the other. And more so than politics, I just really wish that we could all take a big step back, use a really wide optic, and take a look at what the actual issues are, and then find solutions for those issues based on not political allegiance, but simply what's best for society and what will keep everyone safe, cops included. Now, one of the things that we have to do in order to have that happen is embrace the art of communication, which is lacking right now. And communication is just one of those things that should come naturally, but it doesn't right now because there's so much tension, there's so much anxiety, so much stress when it comes to talking politics. And I'm 38 years old. I can remember some of my younger years when I was a kid, and I always refer to them as like old school Democrats, old school Republicans. They could have a conversation, right? My family could have a conversation at Christmas or at Thanksgiving that involved politics because people didn't lose their shit when they talked about it. There was enough room for agree to disagree. And sometimes, more times than not, actually, people were willing to listen to the other side's objective. Hey, this is what we're trying to do, and this is why. Right now, I feel like there's so much just drive that you have to feel this way. You have to agree with this, and if you don't, well, then you're wrong. that's a horrible way to do business. And it's a horrible way to jeopardize public safety, because right now the proof is out there. The data is collected. We're so far gone into this new way of life, years, that we have the data to say, no, this didn't work. It's not working. And it's probably not a good idea to keep this going. That in itself should be enough for both sides to go, all right, cool. And it sucks to be wrong. Yeah. But that's part of trial and error. We don't have a crystal ball. This is a Minority Report where we know what's coming. This is the way the world works. And there's trial and there's error, and then there's repair. And right now I feel like we're seeing the results. They're not good. They're not keeping anybody safe. And the effort to fix or otherwise change any of that is not on the table. Now, one of the things that I've talked about before, and I'll talk about this until it stops, is that the ability for us to look at things from the other side and see their perspective is so important. And right now, even if I don't agree with it, I still have to see it from their perspective, right? I don't have to like it, but I do have to hear it and at least see it so I can understand why they feel that way, good, bad, or indifferent. When it comes to reciprocation in that regard, that's where it stops. And I'm perfectly okay with identifying problems in politics. And as an independent myself, I can say there's way more cooperation from Republicans than there is for Democrats. It's just that's my personal takeaway, and I know that a lot of you listening are going to agree with that, because there's just so much emotion, or so much passion is the wrong word, emotion for sure, just an inability to compromise. And when we have that on the table, we're not going to get anything solved. We're not going to get anything done, because the majority of that party is going to just say, yes, this guy said it's good, so it's great. Onward, here we go. For those of you who disagree with that, yeah, I will acknowledge that there are people on the right who are equally as baffling when it comes to communication, but those numbers are so small compared to what exists on the left side. Now, public safety, going back to that being a concept that everyone should support, it is, in theory, an unpopular way to do business, right? The liberal side of things like to be just that, a little bit more liberal when it comes to XYZ, when it comes to crime and criminals. And I agree to some extent that, yeah, I wish that we didn't have to do that. I truly do. I wish that we could have these things in place that are lax in nature, that we didn't have to have all of these laws and all of these issues on the table. I really, truly want that. But that's not the reality I live in. I live in a world where now more than ever, crime and criminals are, some of the more powerful entities among society. That's a problem for me, and it should be a problem for anybody living in the US. That's just a common issue. There is a lack of public safety right now. And for the people who say, well, no, there isn't, they have their opinions and their reasons, but more than likely they really haven't been put into a situation where they've been victimized or even come close to it, or maybe they just don't want to talk about it. Either way, we won't see anything change anytime soon. And more people, cops included, are going to die at the hands of an out of control and unmanaged group of the population who feels that the law doesn't apply to them. Specifically, the more recent incident with NYPD. But if we were to go back in time, I've been doing this job for a long time. I can tell you that there's never been a lull in cops dying, but there have been spikes. And more so than just the cop dying, I always make it a point to look as deep as I can and get as much information to see how they were killed. Being shot is one thing, and going into the very graphic details of how they were killed, that's going to answer a lot more questions for me personally. The more recent one, I can't speak to it because I don't have the information, but I can go back in time and tell you about a variety of other shootings, to include the one that I posted about more recently, the Oakland PD4. That gentleman essentially executed both of the motor units and then actually stood over them and shot them in the back multiple times, and then continued in his tirade, ultimately killing two more. But again, the details, right? I'm not saying that, by no means is it take away from the fact that they were killed. But if we look at the method and then the delivery of that death and how it happened, there's going to be a larger group of people who will start to pay more attention when they see that it was not just, oh, he was trying to defend himself, or, oh, I mean, the list goes on, right? For reasons that we've heard as of late as to why this individual chose to kill someone. But what we don't often do or see or hear about is the method or nature surrounding how they were killed. And that's where it matters to me, because that shows intent. And that's kind of more of my cop brain going, okay, well, how could this have been prevented? Well, there's not a lot that could have prevented this because of XYZ. And lately we've been seeing more execution or ambush style attacks, which is just so shitty, because most of these cops out there are trained so well. They're trained with the ability to do their jobs and do their jobs well, stay safe, keep everyone else safe. It's just a really fucked up scenario when a cop dies at the hands of what I would essentially call a cheap shot, and put them in a scenario where the playing field was level, where that fight started from the get-go, and 9 times out of 10 you'd probably see the cop being victorious in that regard. Now, along with the overall just sort of bullshit attacks we're seeing, bullshit in terms of the sucker punch or the ambush, it's the aftermath that we don't see from society that should be just completely enraged, right there. And the point I'm trying to make too is that there's no gain for that individual. I've talked about this before on other shows where, what was the gain for this individual killing the cop? Well, usually it's to get out of the scenario that they're in, but lately we're just seeing people killing just because, and they're not suffering from mental health issues. It is just a complete societal a disarray of decay of society, and a lack of respect, not for authority, but for human life. And we see the same thing over and over again. We see the same scenario, same outcome, same aftermath, same reaction from society. And then life just sort of, goes back to normal. We just start pedaling again, and then off we go. And pretty soon it's dust in the wind. And that happens almost exclusively with any death. But I think that as soon as we realize that nothing's going to change, well, the sun comes up the next day and we have to go back to work. There's no pause. There's no, okay, how do we completely, rewrite the system? And those are all huge, huge requests to process. And instead of saying, how can we fix the issue, the thought or the mindset behind it should be, how do we fix the existing holes, right? We have this big net, and we're not going to be able to fix the net, but we can fix the holes in the net, right? And some of these holes, the smaller ones that don't get a lot of attention, are the ones that are getting a lot of cops killed. If you really dive back into not necessarily the method, but as to how that situation came to be, the majority of these guys are usually released too early. They have an extensive criminal background, and the method of how they acquired the gun was completely illegal, which still brings me back to President Biden thinking about how gun control was the issue behind the NYPD shooting, which is just, it makes no sense. Why? Because the information isn't there to support it. This individual armed himself illegally and obtained the gun illegally, and the rest is history. And there isn't a single solitary thing that could have prevented that other than the gun itself being manufactured, which just, that's a go nowhere argument. But I really feel like there's a lot of support that comes from the community, and I'm not downplaying that. And I think as cops, we're all appreciative of the support that we get. But from a state or city leadership level, when it comes to a reaction, depending on where you live, is going to dictate that reaction. I live in California, so you can almost guarantee that there's not going to be a reaction from our government. There hasn't been for a very long time, and I don't think there ever will be. If they were to have a reaction, if they were to try to fix the issue, it would go against everything that they pushed forward or were successful in getting signed off that is now common law and practice within the state of California. If they were to redact or change any of that, they would have to essentially admit that they were wrong, which most of them don't want to do, because getting reelected is important. So even looking at Prop 47, which to this day, if you told me all the good things that it did, I still would argue, well, it didn't do enough because we have all this bad stuff over here. To this day, Governor Newsom will sing its praises and will protect his predecessor, Governor Brown, who was the one who put all that into motion. So politics, as much as everyone wants to keep politics out of this, it's the literal bedrock foundation as to how this can or cannot happen again. If we were to look at the majority, if not all of these individuals and their criminal history, we would all probably for the most part agree that they had no business being out of custody. And I say that when I say everybody, I mean everybody across the aisle and in between should be in agreement that this individual was not fit to be released yet. Now, if we look at political allegiance and the thought process behind a lot of that, there's a lot of people who are going to simply disagree with that statement because of who they voted for or their political party. That is probably one of the most, if not the most toxic issue we have right now as a nation. And it sucks that it's an election year because everything becomes political. There was a big, huge backlash from the left when it came to Trump visiting the family and doing all this other stuff. And I saw a lot of posts on Instagram about it. I saw a lot of people in the comments going back and forth about how it was a political move. Okay, fine. It's an election year and he's running for president. Was it political? I don't know. But I do know that President Biden was not there. So I don't care who you vote for. I don't care what your political affiliation is. Someone showed up and someone did not. That's my takeaway from that scenario. And it just goes to show his level of cause, care, or concern for cops in the US and also public safety. I keep referencing public safety because as a nation, we all are one unit. And there's certain parts of us that are part of the public safety aspect, and there's certain parts that are not. And I don't think people understand how traumatizing it is for society to lose someone from their community that is a, protector, someone who's in law enforcement, public service. That sends a message, a very, very extreme message that crime and criminals are in control. And to have that as an outlook or a perspective from a member of society who is dependent on that resource, it can send a very dangerous message. It also emboldens other criminals, emboldens criminal enterprise, and makes it feel like they are winning. And right now they are winning, and by a very large margin. If there was a fix, I couldn't give it to you in a sentence. The way that I see it and the way that I think we're going to see any type of resolve or any type of reduction is when we start holding criminals accountable. That is a broad brush. I completely understand that. But that is the starting point, because it takes an individual to commit these acts. It doesn't take a gun. It doesn't take any type of other tool. There is a person behind the homicide, and that person, we should look deep into their past and see, okay, cool. This was a fluke incident. This is his first offense. Moving on. Versus the far majority of the rest of them, which are career criminals with a lengthy rap sheet and a very, very violent past. A lot of these guys have a lot of violent felonies, yet they're being released almost as quickly as they're booked. And in that regard, we're going to see sort of a rinse, wash, repeat type scenario where nothing really changes. And like I said before, I've seen this happen again and again, and it's the same song and dance, the same general reaction from society, the same support that we get from the society, from that same society. And then when it comes to reform, you'll get a lot of cops and people that will start making their voices heard, and more power to them. I'm not discounting that, but once that hot potato gets chucked, no one catches it because no one cares. And if they don't care, it's not necessarily for personal reasons, but more so political. Again, going back to politics, you're going to be the unpopular person if you try to instill some type of change for criminal justice reform. That's just the way it is. In a state, especially where the liberal mindset is the primary focus of most of those members, it's going to be very difficult, and you're going to become not very popular very quickly. Now, there's a lot of people who don't care, and they're continuing to fight this battle. But the reality is that that's not going to get very far unless the masses start to support it, or other government officials put political allegiance aside and say, you know what, this is an issue that I think we all need to look at. We can all agree this is bad. And there's a lot of people who will not necessarily say the words they signed up for this, or they won't say, this is what's to be expected. they'll say it in a certain way that makes it sound like it's respectful, but it's not. I understand that with my career, with any other cop out there, we all get it. Our job comes with a certain level of risk, right? Our job is inherently dangerous, but we are victorious in those scenarios far more than we are not. But when it finally does happen, someone gets hurt or someone gets killed, we really have to capitalize on that moment and see why. Why did this happen? How did this happen? How can we prevent this from happening again? That last part loses any type of energy as soon as it leaves the local level and goes higher up. Why? I don't know. I don't have an answer as to why. I can assume that it's because it's an issue that was not going to go away and it would be too hard to solve, or it's not going to gain a lot of traction because there's going to be division when it comes to a decision, or there won't be enough support from whichever side politically that decision is associated to or whatever they're trying to get accomplished. It's a very messy, messy road. And as I stated on Instagram, it is a roadway that is paved in blood and politics. There's no easy way to find a solution on the road of trying to keep the public safe and keep cops safe. And, at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of work that cops are going to have to do. And there's going to be a lot of violence. That's a word that I don't think the public really understands in totality for what it's going to take to curb the influx of criminal behavior. In a sentence, violence is the only real currency that we've had as a planet that has dictated change, if you really think about that. And it's kind of sad to think of it that way, but it's pretty much true. There's a lot of things that would have changed or could be different for us right now as a nation had violence not been the answer. Now, on a societal level, if we have criminal enterprise out of control, killing people of all kinds, not just cops, but we have homicide rates that are up. We have all of these acts of violence that are up. The likelihood of us needing to return violence in order to stop it is highly probable. Is it desirable? Is it what we want? No, but that's what's going to happen. We're going to have this extreme need and a very, very, very aggressive police force in order to take us back to where we were however many years ago when life was good and the communities we lived in were safe. There's never going to be an easy way to obtain that. And unfortunately, and I'm not talking about literal violence, but force of action, right? We think violence, we think death. That's not necessarily the case. People hear the word violence and they automatically assume that that's a negative thing, which it is, but at the same time, it is something that's going to have to be used to overcome, right? We're trying to mitigate an issue that we have in front of us, and we currently are being attacked. So the only reaction is to come back stronger, faster, and harder and defeat the opposition. It's the same mindset for anything else. And unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of things get worse before they get better. I really believe that. And as much as it pains me to say that, it's the reality that we are living in right now. The world and our nation is a very hostile environment right now. And locally, and I know everyone else is feeling it, it just feels like we are losing and bad guys are winning. And when your overall objective is to put as many of those people out of business as possible, it really causes a lot of anxiety and stress to think about how much more work we're going to have to do in order to find some type of baseline normal. Guys, thank you so much for listening. This is just going to be a quick one today. I do have some stuff lined up for next weekend, some guests that are going to be coming on. I'm also going to be a guest on a few others. That Tone Alert podcast, I think, is going to drop this week. I will probably add that to my queue for you guys to check out and listen to. Also looking forward to hooking up with BC Sanders from the Disruptors podcast. I had a really good time with them, and we're probably going to hook up next week, tentatively. So yeah, that's it, guys. Thanks again. Have a safe week, and we'll be back next weekend. See ya.